Hello YouTube, welcome back. This is part 2 of forging some shears. So in this episode we are going to forge the edges and the spring, and we're going to form them. So this is the state of the shears as of the end of the last episode. So we are going to start by rounding off the arms between the spring and the edges, and that will allow us to twist the blades 90 degrees upwards. So, rounding off the arms, it's probably a technical term for them, don't know what it is, I'll just call them arms. So, basically the hardy hole is quite convenient at this stage, because I can fit the spring in there, it just about matches, and I will just knock off the edges to form an octagon, then knock off the new edges to form a 16 faceagon, and then gently round it. Now for the rounding stage, I am not forging particularly heavily, I'm literally just dropping the hammer and turning. And you can see it's coming out nice and smooth. So with those done, I will clamp the blade in the vise and just twist the spring 90 degrees. And we want both of the blades to be facing upwards. So with the twist done, I will just knock off any raised edges that have popped up from the twisting. And here you have it. So that's quite a nice smooth forging, isn't it? Look at that with the light behind. Looks just like Christmas. So the next thing I'll do is I will form the edges. I'm using a wet anvil technique for this. And just start with beveling. The wet anvil technique will help blast the scale off. I am vigorously scrubbing with the wire brush between heats. And the water will blast off any scale that forms between the brushing and the forging. So I'm going for quite a nice knife-like section here. You can see it tapers quite elegantly down to a point. And I'm checking regularly to make sure that we don't get any delamination between the high carbon steel and the wrought iron. So because the high carbon steel will not want to move as far or as quickly as the wrought iron, so if your weld isn't particularly good, that will cause you some problems. And every now and then measure to make sure that you are getting them both to the right section. So with that forged, I will straighten everything up again, because the round section tends to flick about as you're messing around with the bevels. And again, light hammer blows on the round section. You don't want to forge it, you just want to straighten and dress. So at this stage we have both of the blades beveled and formed. So now we're going to move on to the spring itself. Now we're going to forge this quite thin, so give it a very good scrub. And almost like forming the eye for an axe, we're going to do a set down on one end, and then a set down on the other end. And we're going to make sure that we spread the material out evenly both sides as we're doing these set downs. Not a royal we, by the way. I'm not referring to myself in the third person. That's a we for everybody's going to have a go at this, which I strongly encourage you to do. So with that done, I will use the cross peen and start stretching the material out to form the spring. Now I do wish I had given myself an extra ½ inch on that spring. It would have been a bit more elegant afterwards, but it still does its job, as you will see at the end of the video. So after you've cross peened it, start dressing the edges and the thickness. And it should be nice and straight at this stage, as well as smooth. Now with that dressed, I will head over to the bic and I will actually chamfer these edges to give it almost like a half round section. So I'm just beveling out, and that will kind of form the outside edges to a crescent shape, which we will emphasise on the flat of the anvil in a minute. So I'm going into a dull heat here, and that will allow me to planish the material as well. So when you're satisfied with your spread, start dressing that, and you can see what I mean by almost like a crescent shape. Now you want the spring to be an even thickness across the whole length, because the thin bits will flex more, and you want it to be flexing along the entire length of the spring once it's been formed. So at this stage, we've basically finished off the blank. So I will now head over to the linisher, and the carbon steel faces I'm going to clean up and dress flat. Now, I could have been romantic and I could have draw filed it, but time's the enemy, so I linished it. You basically just want these to be smooth and flat, like so. Now don't forget that the carbon steel faces are supposed to come into contact with each other, so it's dress one, turn it over, dress the other. And at this stage I'm using a piece of scrap, and I have heated the blade to a dull red heat, and I'm literally just curving it ever so slightly by putting pressure. I'm not hammering it because I don't want to damage the smooth grind. I'm literally just bending it. So as you can see here, there is a slight deflection in the blade now, and that will allow the cutting edges to meet up along the entire length, and you'll see how towards the end of the video. Now I'll stick a piece of scrap in the vise and I will bend the spring around it. This piece of scrap was a bit small, so I then moved on to a bigger piece of scrap, which is actually a bolt header rather than scrap. I will just bend the spring around it, and I will put a slight deflection in the arms leading up to the blades, so they are slightly curved upwards. And I'm actually, you'll notice that one blade is above the other, and it's actually deliberately done so that it's the outside of the blades meeting rather than the carbon steel faces. And that is so that there is tension in there when I spring them the right way. So here are the formed shears. Now you can see at the moment it is the ugly edges which are meeting, and I will just pull that over like so. So now the carbon steel faces are meeting, and you'll see that the deflection that I put in there is now causing the two cutting edges to meet up somewhere along the blades. So you can see the deflection there. Now, as I close the shears, that causes a gap to form, but that gap is behind where you've already cut. There's the gap. Now these haven't been sharpened, they are literally just off the forge. I did start a slight bevel on the outside, but I reckon that in spite of not being sharp, these should still cut paper. But as they say, proof of the plum is in the pudding, so we will try and cut up this parts list, which I hope I don't need anymore. Now, I was quite proud of myself that these cut at this stage, so I got a bit over enthusiastic and spent a good 5 minutes cutting stuff up. I will spare you all of that, apart from that one last little snip. In part 3 we're going to actually put a sharp edge on these and heat treat them. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like or a comment. If you enjoy all of my videos, please consider donating on Patreon. It really helps me out in sponsoring materials and whatnot. Here is my current list of Patreon donors. Thanks a lot, guys. Really helping me out. I will see you all on the next one. Bye.